2024 seems to have been an amazing reading year for so many of our favorite creators. Many of them have found new favorite books and genres, and of course, new favorite authors. But which authors defined the year of 2024? Well, I watched 45 BookTube videos, which amounted to over 1,000 minutes of content to get to the answer of who was the best author. The way I made this list was that every single time that an author's book was mentioned, I gave the author a point. Of course, this means that some authors did have the same amount of points at the end. So in order to get out of any tiebreakers, I used my Instagram followers. Thanks, guys. Before we get to number 10, there were 3 authors that tied for 10th, but they just didn't make the final cut of the list after the Instagram voting. And those 3 authors were George R.R. Martin, Guy Gavriel Kay, and Janie Wirtz. George R.R. Martin mostly got loads of votes from Bookborn. She's had an incredible year discovering A Song of Ice and Fire. She's also already reread A Game of Thrones less than a year after reading it for the first time because she loved it so much. And her love translated to multiple points going to George. But because most of his points came from one booktuber, I decided to put him into the honorable mentions category. The other author was Guy Gavriel Kay with his books like The Lions of Al Rassan, A Song for Arbonne, and the Sarantine Mosaic being widely read throughout BookTube, especially with the read-along for Sailing for Sarantium, and Talking Story really pushing A Song for Arbonne, which was one of his favorite reads of the year. And the last author is Janie Wirtz, the author of the Wars of Light and Shadow series. And now is the perfect time because John from Talking Story is hosting a read-along that he's calling January, at least for this month, alongside Brian from BellTube, Andrew Wizardly Reads, Sylvia from Library Unbounded, Brenda by Reading by My Shelf, and loads of other booktubers. And so if you want to jump into Wars of Light and Shadow, now is the time. So jumping into the number 10 spot, we have Robert Jackson Bennett, who got here because of his success with his new release, The Tainted Cup. The Tainted Cup was so widely loved that actually all his points this year came from that book. And to me, honestly, that was a little bit shocking because he has written 2 other big trilogies that have also found moderate success on BookTube. So I was kind of expecting that the people that loved The Tainted Cup would have jumped into his past books like Foundry Side, for example, and that those would have made a top 10 list. But no, all his points came only from The Tainted Cup. So congrats to Robert Jackson Bennett for making this list, especially going off of only one book. In spot number 9, we have Jay Kristoff, the author of Empire of the Vampire and Empire of the Damned. This one releasing this year. As someone who has grown up with BookTube, I've actually seen different books from Jay Kristoff slowly over the years make their way to different booktubers' favorites list. But this was mostly seen in booktubers who specialized more in YA, especially with the Illuminae files. I still think Gemina, the second book, is a really, really solid book that has stood the test of time. Then later with Nevernight, and now it seems that he has really penetrated into the adult fantasy sphere with Empire of the Vampire. Spaced Out Wizard actually has an amazing and hilarious video about why you should read Empire of the Vampire and Jay Kristoff in general, so I highly recommend it. So yeah, it's really cool to see an author that I've known but from a totally different audience slowly come into his own with this audience. In number 8, we have Larry McMurtry, the author of Lonesome Dove. Lonesome Dove in general this year had such a resurgence with the 2 Ramblers reading it and it becoming Richard's favorite book of all time. We also had one of my favorite booktubers, Jay from Paperback Journeys, rave about it as well. Not to mention, of course, Joanna from Joanna Reads. But Lonesome Dove was not the only Larry McMurtry book that earned him a spot on this list. The other 2 were The Last Picture Show and The Streets of Laredo, both of which were mentioned by Jake, who you might know better as Man Carrying Thing, the booktuber and comedian extraordinaire. He is someone whose taste in literature I genuinely really admire and find very inspirational. And as someone who's been trying to get a little bit more into Westerns recently, I'm definitely adding these 3 books to my list. In 7th place, we have James Islington, the author of The Will of the Many, which has been gaining steadily more and more popularity since its release. However, the praise for The Will of the Many would not have been enough to put James Islington on this list. His other book, The Shadow of What Was Lost, perhaps better known as the first book of the Lycaeus trilogy. And its praises were mostly sung by Hannah from A Clockwork Reader, one of the OG booktubers that I've been really following for a really, really long time. In fifth place is my favorite author of all time, we can say it all together, Joe Abercrombie. Despite not releasing anything this year, Joe Abercrombie has still had an amazing year, with lots of new readers picking up the First Law trilogy for the first time, and the standalones, because the standalones were loved by John from Talking Story, who had Best Served Cold as one of his favorite books of the year, and by Paperback Journeys, who, at my recommendation, read The Heroes and was absolutely floored by it. So I'm very happy that Joe Abercrombie, despite not having had released anything, is still popular enough to earn a spot on this list. And let's not forget, he will have a release coming soon. It's called The Devils. It's coming out in a few months, and I am so excited. I'm so excited for him to step away from the First Law and to see how his style will translate into this alternative history sort of fantasy set in our real world. I can't wait. I can't wait. And hopefully he'll make this list next year as well because of it. Oh, whoopsie, and I meant to say sixth place because in fifth place we have Matt Dinniman. I'm so sorry, that was an awful faux pas on my part. Matt Dinniman, I think his success this year is so amazing because he was originally a self-published author, publishing his Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which has had insane success on the platform this year. Universally, the series seems to be beloved, and although The Butcher's Masquerade was overall the most commonly mentioned book in the series as the favorite, it has been really difficult for me to find any naysayers about any of the other installments. It's been universally beloved by Bookborn, Andrew Watson, the Tudor Ramble guys, Brian from BellTube, and even though I'm quite hesitant to pick up a lit RPG series, the amount of amazing reviews that this has been getting, and the fact that it just sounds so absurd but so joyous, makes me really wonder if this is one that I should pick up. Anyway, I think it's amazing that a self-published author is taking over BookTube, and congrats to Matt Dinniman for also getting a publishing deal, and of course for getting fifth place. I mean, it's truly such a huge honor to be on my list, am I right? In fourth place is an author that personally doesn't really speak to me, but I'm clearly in the minority because this author has been mentioned 11 times as a favorite in 2024 by all sorts of readers from all parts of BookTube, from Peru's Project, Jess Owens, Andrew Watson, and more. Robin Hobb is undoubtedly a BookTube darling. The books that earned her a spot on this list included Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, Assassin's Fate, and The Ship of Magic. People really love her transportative, fairy tale-like writing that really brings characters to life like Fitz, Ketterkin, Burrich, and so many others. And I also think that having Robin Hobb ranked this high kind of is proof that I'm not tampering with the list too much because personally, I really didn't connect with her, but everyone else does, and Realm of the Elderlings is so beloved. If you are a fan of it, then I highly recommend checking out Derry's channel because it's her favorite series of all time, and she has amazing deep dive videos and discussions about all sorts of things connected to Farseer and Realm of the Elderlings in general. Top 3, here we go. Now, with the recent backlash, I have been a bit surprised that this author made it all the way to third place, especially since, people were composing their top books of the year's list after this author's most recent release. But overall, it hasn't really impacted his success. And the author is Brandon Sanderson. And just to show you how much love he has received in 2024, Robin Hobb had 11 points, Brandon Sanderson has 18. My hypothesis as to why Sanderson did so well when it comes to end of year statistics is that people were rereading the Stormlight Archive and sometimes even the entire Cosmere in preparation for the release of Wind and Truth, and some people were reading it for the first time. And I mean, when you read Oathbringer for the first time, Words of Radiance, the ending of the first Mistborn trilogy, those moments are crazy and mind-blowing, and I really think that they are some of the best books that I've read ever in my life. And so I think because of the year-long build up to the release of Stormlight, there were so many people reading it and loving it. And so even if Wind and Truth didn't make it to everyone's favorites list of the year, some other Sanderson book often still did. Now, there are some people that are really over him. For example, Jess Owens actually made a really good video kind of explaining her frustrations with Sanderson as an author and how she's trying to not fall for the hype train anymore and read what's best for her, which I think that's so fair. The Tudor Ramble guys and Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews have both been very outspoken about how Wind and Truth just didn't really live up to the expectations. But despite all of that, Brandon Sanderson still got number 3 on this list. Before I reveal the top 2, I just want to say both of them got 19 points each. However, I did put one of the authors higher because I think just given the year he's had in particular, and just the fact that he did really release a very successful book this past year and has been very engaging with the BookTube community online, it feels like he has really monopolized the year of 2024 when it comes to, like, you know, the most popular best author. So I do put that author slightly higher. Let me know in the comments if you can guess who it is. But before we get to that, we have another author who is more of a legacy act. And because this author is more of a legacy author, and I didn't really think that this past year has been particularly distinguishing when it comes to like the entire history of this author's success, that's why I put him a little bit lower at number 2. And this author is Stephen King. I think just in general, if you look at the history of BookTube or just in general reading ever since his debut with Carrie, Stephen King has and always will be very popular, and new readers are discovering him every year. And so all these books are going to be making top spots in readers' favorite books of the year. And yes, he did release You Like It Darker, which was a collection of short stories earlier on in the year. But all in all, I don't think it was like a huge Stephen King year. Like, there were no major adaptations, no major like novel release that really captured the zeitgeist in a way that in previous years, most recently, I think Fairy Tale did. It amazes me that he was still able to get to number 2. Like, that's amazing. And I think it really speaks to the level at which Stephen King writes. But which books got him his very prestigious space on my very prestigious list? Well, there were a bunch, but some of them included 11/22/63, Misery, Pet Sematary, The Stand, Cujo, and Needful Things. I personally think those are amazing picks. I love Pet Sematary. It made it to my favorite list of the year. Misery, I also read this past year and really knocked my socks off. I read it in like less than 2 days because I was stressing. It was so good. Honestly, I should talk more about it because I feel like I haven't. And The Stand is one of my favorite Stephen King books of all time. It's tied with Pet Sematary, though Pet Sematary edges it out just a little bit. I actually read it in 2020, which was the craziest experience of my life. But yeah, Stephen King is an amazing author and you should totally check him out if you somehow haven't already. But who was the number 1 author of this year? Have you figured it out? I think it's pretty obvious by now, no? Let's say it all together. Christopher Rucchio. Yes, I really think that 2024 was the year of The Sun Eater. I feel like every single month there was someone new reading his books and someone new falling in love with them. From established YouTubers like Mike's Fantasy Book Reviews to newcomers to the scene like Jake from Nerd Level Rising or Chance Dillon, everyone seems to love Christopher Rucchio. Christopher Rucchio also has been really amazing at keeping the fans up to date with his update videos and very eager to engage with this newfound community, appearing on multiple live shows. And with him having just released Disquiet Gods, which was book 6 of The Sun Eater this past year, despite him having the same amount of votes as Stephen King, because of that big release and because of just being a newcomer and really him catapulting himself off into the stratosphere, I think that he deserves to take the #1 spot. If you disagree with me and you think that Stephen King should have taken #1, do let me know why in the comments. The vibe that I get from Christopher Rucchio as well, something that I think is really cool, is that he really seems like he was one of us, you know, one of the fans. Just the way that he speaks about Dune, for example, or Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun. It's really cool to see an author who so obviously shares his love for the books that made him an author, and a very successful one at that. It really feels like we have discovered a new fantasy and science fiction genre great. Maybe he'll be, you know, up in the echelons of Sanderson, George R.R. Martin, or Scott Lynch in the coming years. We just have to wait and see. And anyway, that's all from me. Before I go, do be sure to follow me on Goodreads or Instagram or Letterboxd, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video. Bye-bye!